Hello, my name is Bryant Nelson. I'm a BI rep with account management here at Newdon Technologies. Today I'll be going over part 2 of our advanced JDA webinar. Today this training will be intended to teach people how to create and modify data sources. During this training, I'll be training under the assumption that participants have no access to their database servers and that they have no understanding of SQL. The idea is to allow people to create and modify data sources with only their JDA editor and their access to their JustWare code tables. So what is a JDA data source? A data source is code that pulls the information you're looking to put in your document out of JustWare. To access your data sources in JDA, you go to Edit, Data Sources, and Saved Queries. The list on the right you see here is everything that's pre-written to pull stuff out of JustWare. So I'm going to be going over how to change and create these so that you can pull more than just what's here. Because oftentimes you'll find yourself needing to pull something more, but you don't have it in here. And you see this code over here and most people don't understand it. To begin, I'll start with the code tables in JustWare. So the best way to write data sources in JDA is to write them based off of your codes in JustWare. So you'll see here I have a test case and I have a system administration tab open. So when you hear the term code tables, it refers to this here and all the different codes that are contained within. If you are part of your configuration, you're probably very familiar with your code tables. For example, if I wanted to write a data source against my defendant specifically, I would go into my code tables and go to cases, case involved people, and find my defendant on this list. There he is, and I would use this code here, and I'll explain how later on. But when you hear me refer to codes, I'm always referring to this column here. The reason we use codes instead of saying defendant in our data source is that the codes cannot change. They'll always be this way. The description, however, can change. It can be changed to client or respondent, and then that would break my data source. So best practice is always to be writing data sources against your codes or your master codes and code types, and I'll go over that. To begin, let's look at our JW Vic Widoff. I'll just briefly go over each part of the code here that's making this happen. This isn't intended to be a SQL lesson, but I kind of have to explain how the SQL's working in order for you to be able to understand it and manipulate it. So the first part of the SQL that I'm going to talk about is the select. So when you're looking at a data source, there's a queries header, which is what you see over on the right. There's a query name, which is what you'll see in your JDA over on the left under fields. And then after the double quotes on that, you'll see your SQL. And the SQL extends all the way down till you run into your second set of double quotes, followed by a closing caret. So the first part of this I'm going to talk about is select. Your select statement determines exactly which fields are coming out of JustWare. As with most fields, you can kind of tell just by looking at them what they are. Case in pers full name. So I know that's a case involved party full name. You'll often see, especially with the canned ones, you'll see as and then a something else. And the reason you see that is that's what they call an alias. So instead of seeing case in pers full name in your JDA, you'll actually see full name, which is a little less confusing for the end users who are creating .JDA documents. So with each field that's being pulled in through the select, you'll see a comma after each one. The correct syntax for a select statement is field, comma, field, and just continue that cycle until you hit your last field, with your last field not needing a comma. The next part of the SQL that I'm going to talk about is the from. So in your from, this says which table are you selecting out of, or in this case, views. One thing to note with the from is that it should always be a JW50 view. It never should be a dev, a CTBL, or a TBL view. And the reason for that is those tend to change with upgrades. So they will work, but as soon as your JustWare upgrades and something changes with that table, it could potentially cause your data sources to quit working. So it's always best practice to make sure that you're writing against your JW50 view on your from. I'm going to put on the screen a list of common views that are used in JDA a lot, because there's not really a clean way to figure out what views are where. So here are just a few of the JW50 views that you will probably see and use a lot in JDA. I'll leave that up here for just a moment in case anyone wants to take screenshots and snippets. Okay. So the final part of the SQL that I'm going to talk about is the where. So the where clause is what we're going to be mainly focusing with today. And the reason for that is that it determines what from your table comes back. So with most of your JDA data sources, you're going to see this right here. This is case ID equals @case ID. And what that is it tells the document to pull the information from whatever case you're either previewing against, or once your document's mapped into JustWare, what case ID from the filing cabinet to use. So somewhere on the back end with your filing cabinet, there's a case ID field for each case, and it stores the case ID of that case. When I'm saying case ID, I'm referring to the JustWare case ID. So with pretty much 90% of your JDA data sources, you're going to see case ID equals case ID. And that is good. That's what you want. On this one in particular, there's an additional part which specifies master codes of 2, 3, and 5. So for Vic Wit Off, I know that the master code of 2 is victim, 3 is witness, and 5 is officer. And I'm going to pull up my JustWare to show where I see that. So in my JustWare here, the columns have changed. But if you look at the Customize Snap-in button, you'll see that type is actually master code and category is code type. So if I sort this by type, there's my 2s. Looks like I only have a single 3. And there's my list of 5s. So I know that if I go back to my data source here, it's going to bring back all of this information from my JW50 case in purse, which case involved parties. And then it's going to bring them back for that case ID and only the master codes of 2, 3, and 5. So I'll go to my case. That should bring me back my witness, because that's a 3, my victim, because that's a 2, and my 2 stormtroopers, because they're under the master code of 5. One thing to note with the where clause is that with each additional clause that you add, there'll be an and before it. So the very first part, which normally is the case ID part, it's just where case ID equals @case ID. For every part after that, you need an and. So say I wanted to add another part to this, I would put a space and involve type code equals and whatever your third clause is. So I'm going to go over how to take existing data sources and make them do what you would like them to do. So say I need my JW VicWit off, but I only want to see victims. I don't want to see witnesses and officers. So the best way to do this is to go to my JW VicWit off, click copy to new, and what this is going to do is take all this over here and move it up here to new. So now I can do whatever I want with this without messing with the original one. So where I know that master code of 2 is victim, I only want that one. And I'm going to cover a few of the where syntaxes that you'll need to be aware of when you're changing stuff in here. So when you're doing any kind of equals to, less than, greater than, not equal to, and you're doing it for anything but a number, a specific integer, you have to surround it with single quotes. So where master code's just an integer, I don't have to worry about that. I can say equals to. So this would bring back only my victims on my case. If you're specifying more than one thing, so say let's do victims and witnesses, you type the word in, you do a parenthesis, and again, if they're just numbers, you don't have to do single quotes. So in this case, that would work. But say they're codes, which have letters in them, I would have to surround them with single quotes. So single quote vic, comma, to separate each one inside my parentheses, single quote wit. And those would be pulled directly from my code tables, again, over here under code. So now that I've changed my involved type master code, let's change it back to a 2 and a 3. I need to change the name because I can't have 2 data sources with the same name. So this is one important thing to note when you're creating new data sources, is it's always best practice to change the name here and change it to something besides JW underscore. That allows you to keep the canned default ones separate from your custom ones. So it's kind of up to you how you do this. Me personally, I do cust underscore. In this case, I do cust underscore vic wit because I'm pulling victims and witnesses. I've seen agencies do their abbreviations instead. So let's say Denver DA. Something like that. It's pure preference. If you don't know what to do, I recommend just cust underscore. Now, when you're changing the names, you'll notice that the same name is up here twice. Don't worry about this top one when you're creating a new one, when it's over here under new, because as soon as I hit save, it's going to ask me to select a name, and that will be the top one. And generally, you'll just name them the same. Hit OK. Now you'll notice up here at the top, I have a new data source called cust underscore vic wit. And if I add that to my data source and run it, it should only pull from my case ID and involved type master codes of 2 and 3. The next part that I'm going to cover is changing the prompts. So now that I've got this brand new data source, it's still going to caption victim, witness, law officer when it pops up. Should I be doing a multi-select, or should there be more than one to pick from? So I'm going to cover how to change and manipulate the prompt that your end users see on your data sources. So the prompt caption is the header, like what appears across the top of your dialogue. And for this purpose, you can make it say whatever you want. It just has to be inside these double quotes. So I'm going to make this say victim, witness. And then on the prompt, which is going to say right above all their options, I'm just going to delete off law officer. Now down here you'll notice you have helper fields, and these are the details that your end users will get for each row that's coming back. So in this one, it's going to show them the full name, and it's going to call it name, and then it's going to show them the involved type description, and it's going to call it involvement type. So the field name over here is what you want to be pulled in, and that comes from the select up here. So in this case, they pulled in full name right there, and then involved type description. The display name is simply what they'll see it as. So instead of them seeing full name, we could have it say name. Instead of them seeing involved type desk, they'll see involvement type. Now say you only want to see full name and not the involvement type. All you have to do is just delete this helper row out, and that's it. But say you want to keep that, but you also want to add a new one. All you need to do is highlight one of the existing rows, place a hard return, and paste. And then just change this to whatever you'd like it to be. In this case, I want to see, let's put in the case agency description so I can see my well, I guess my witnesses if they have a case agency. So I'm going to go case agency desk, which I see up here in my select. And down here I'm going to see, down here I'm going to alias it as agency description. Now I'm going to add this to data source and preview it to show you the changes we just made. So it's going to make me save because we changed stuff. Add to data source. And I'm just going to drag a field over here so that it'll give me dialogue. Oh, and I forgot to put in my preview case ID. So my case ID for my test case here is 13-1. Preview. There we go. So now you'll see I have 3 columns, a name, an agency description, and an involved type. And instead of saying select the victim, witness, officer, it only says exactly what I told it to say. So that's prompts. Next thing I'm going to cover is, say you're looking at an existing data source and there's something not in your select that you want to pull. How do you find it? So at the beginning of this training, remember that I said I'm not going to be going off the assumption that you have access to SQL. So the best way for you to find out all of the fields that you have at your disposal without having access to SQL is simply putting in a star or an asterisk, if you will. So what happens when you put a star in your select is that it's going to pull every single field from wherever your from is. So I'm going to save this just to show. So now over here under fields, when I drill down my Vic Wit, all of a sudden there's every single field I have at my disposal. And this isn't the cleanest way of finding out exactly what's in your froms, but it's probably the best way without having access to SQL. So now you can go through this list and you can find out exactly what the names of your columns are that you're after. Oh, hey, there's my driver's license number and driver's license class. I wasn't sure if it was actually spelled out or if it was DL. So now I know, and I can go back into my data source and specifically type that in. Usually when I would do when I would replace my entire select with a star, I would copy my original fields out first so that I don't have to go in and retype all of that. So a few more things that I'm going to cover is, say you create a custom data source, but it's not showing up over here on the left under fields. You go edit data source, it's showing up here. It's saying that it's imported, but it's not showing up over here. There's a few different troubleshooting steps that you can follow through to try and figure out what's going wrong. So I'm going to say 95% of the time when your data source is not showing up over on the left, it's because your SQL is wrong. There's something, usually incorrect syntax, something's invalid with your SQL, and JDA can't validate SQL, so it's going to let you save even if you've got wrong SQL in there. So you've kind of got to work through it to figure out what you missed. So when I'm doing existing data source, so say this data source wasn't working on me, but I know the original JW Vic with off data source is working, I would probably start by looking at my select and saying, for this example, I'm going to copy paste the select from this back up here. So remember how with select syntax you need a comma after each one of your fields except the last one? All it takes is one missing comma to break a data source. So for this, I'm going to delete this comma out here and save. So now you'll see over there under fields, my data source is gone. It's not showing anymore. So all it takes is a single comma. So sometimes you can find it looking at all this code. Oh, hey, there's a comma missing here. That's probably what it is. Other times you'll sit here and you'll change stuff and go back and change stuff and go back, and you just cannot figure it out. So when you're dealing with this situation where this is really similar to my JW Vic with off, and I know for sure that that one works, what I'll do is grab the SQL from my JW Vic with off and start over, if you will. So copy this, bring it up, paste it in here. So now I know that I have correct functioning SQL in here, and I'll just start over with modifying it. So I want this to be back to only 2 and 3. That's one thing you can check. A few other things to know is that down here on your where clause, make sure you have an and after each one if you add a second clause in here. Say you want to say and DOB greater than, we'll do 1992. If you don't add a DOB, if you don't add an and add before that, it's not going to work. It will break your seat because it's not valid SQL. So those are just a few things to know. Another thing to note too is if you're having troubles finding what you're looking for, finding the froms that you're after, maybe your SQL's just not working no matter what you do. A few things to note is some IT departments, it just kind of depends from IT to IT, some IT departments will have SQL knowledge. So they'll be able to look at this and say, oh yeah, I know what this is SQL. And they could help you troubleshoot, figure out, what you're missing and where to find what you're looking for. Say you don't have an IT department that knows SQL, you're also welcome to call our support department here at Newdon. They're always available to help out with data sources. I know personally how frustrating it is when you don't have a data source that's pulling what you want, because when I started, I didn't know how to do the data sources. For those of you that don't know, our support department can be reached at support@newdon.com, as well as 877-587-8927. A few final things that I'm going to cover is just a few of the different things that you can do down in the where clause, as far as less than, greater than, not in, all of that. So I'm going to say and involve type code. Now here I can say equals, which is just an equal sign, not equals, which is an exclamation mark with an equal sign. there's not really less than or greater than that'll apply to a evolve type code, but less than and greater than is just the carets. So that would be less than, that would be greater than. You probably use those for like date times. For example, the future court events here, it uses an event date is greater than get date, which is whatever today is. You'll notice this isn't actually a caret, and the reason for that is that the data sources are XML, and carets are kind of a noise symbol for XML, and it disrupts the XML if you have a caret right there. So JDA converts it into something that still reads as a caret but doesn't break the XML. In addition to less than, greater than, you saw me do an in, so in, and then parentheses enclosing my multiple fields, my multiple master codes, my multiple involvement type codes. You can also do not in. So say you want all but 2 of the evolve type code, you can say not in, and then specify the 2 that you don't want to be pulled. So I want all my case involvements but my defendant and my attorney. Just like that. I think that that's everything that I'm going to cover today for advanced JDA data sources. I appreciate you all taking the time to watch this. I know that looking at the code over there on the left, it can be really intimidating, and unless you understand SQL, unless you already have a prior knowledge of SQL, it's going to be a little rough to work with and manipulate these data sources to make them do what you want. So just hang in there and feel free to reach out to us if you are struggling. Again, I thank you for your time, and I will be closing out this webinar.